Okay, are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay, I call this meeting to order. If you would, Councilmember Pacino, if you would give us the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Having celebrated Memorial Day yesterday, in memory and thanks to those members of our military who gave their lives for our freedom, I don't think anyone has said it better than John McCrae in his touching poem. In Flanders Field, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks so bravely singing fly scarce ahead and hear the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Field. Our thanks for our freedom and those who gave their lives for us. It is in their memory that we share this week. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you very much. Communications,
I don't have anything tonight.
okay. The next council business meeting will be held Monday, June 8th, 7 p.m., hopefully at City Hall Council Boardroom, second floor, City Center. So this probably, most likely will be our last virtual meeting, and we will be back to inside the council boardroom next meeting, which will be June 8th at 7 p.m. We have listed on here event applications and food truck discussion, but we're waiting for information from BID, who was discussing this at their meeting early this morning. And so there really wasn't enough time for them to provide us with any input. So we're going to pause that and put it on the next meeting. Okay, because I think it's very important that BID has a say, since we're talking about this item is basically affecting the whole BID district. So we need to hear what they need, what they discussed and what they have opinions on, and then we'll go from there. So Councilmember Bayakowski understands that that's what we're going to do, so we're going to hold off on that. You did get some information in a separate email that you'll have a couple weeks to look at and maybe talk to some people if you feel you need to. And that's in a separate email that came, all the information Bob was able to obtain from surrounding areas that have a similar type policy. So at this point, we'll go into the investment policy. Marty, would you like to take over from that?
Absolutely. Council President, members of City Council. We have been approached by 3+1, the firm that's helping us with investments. And the Bank of Akron and the Bank on Buffalo are emerging. And currently at this point in time, there is an opportunity that has arisen for us to get a more favorable interest rate. A number of the interest rates, as many of you have heard, are plunging. But they are currently holding up a fairly decent rate. I think it was somewhere around 0.75%, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but compared to zero or negative interest rates, or even up to 0.3 in some other areas, it gives us a chance to take some of what we call they're still liquid funds, but these are more of our funds that aren't immediately needed, and it's an opportunity to set it up in what we call an extremely liquid account, so that if we have to access the money that we would be able to. This one is going to, it's very clean and neat request tonight, and that's why we're asking to get into the special business meeting with this particular item, because of the fact that it's so fluid with these interest rates right now. They were asked us if we would come to you and present this request, and if you're okay with it, then we will see what kind of, and we have vetted them. They are very good and very stable local bank. So we feel fairly comfortable, at least on our side, in discussion with financial staff, and we would request and recommend that this go ahead and move to the special business tonight.
Heidi, I see you wrote this memo to the city manager. Did you have anything to add to that? I think in the future, you want to modify the investment policy to actually allow for the city manager to add banks and then report to council as soon as possible. Is that what I read in there?
Correct. This is just kind of a quick thing just to get Bank on Buffalo in there so that we can move quickly with investing this money. Ideally, what we'd like to do is really not have that list of designees be the only options that we have, and not for operations and that sort of thing, but truly for investing the money in CDs, highly liquid options and stuff like that, so that we can move on it quickly without having to wait for a council meeting to come up in case it is a bank that's not listed as one of our designated depositories. So like I said, ideally, we would make it so that the city manager, as long as it's a reputable bank or investment firm, however it's worded, financial institution, that we can invest in them without having to come to council first. But then what we would do is let you guys know at the very next business meeting about it. And then at the end of the year, if there were any new ones, we would add them all at that time.
Right, right. So at this point, we're just adding the one.
Correct.
And then that other modification is we'll talk about that in the future, but I just wanted to touch base on it because it is included in your memo.
Correct.
And,
That's correct.
And,
Yeah, that was.
and obviously the wording would have to include some kind of checks and balances so that if the city manager was to that, it'd have to be maybe in conjunction with yourself and maybe Lisa Neary to make sure that they are the right bank and that there is no concerns instead of just one person making that investment. So whatever that wording is, now's the time to start working on that, to bring it back to council at a later time. And then we wouldn't have to miss an opportunity and wait for 2 weeks or maybe sometimes in the summer, almost a month before we have a council meeting and we lose out on a good return on our investment because we're delayed so long by moving that money there. So
That's correct.
I think it's a good idea, but I would rather, and I don't know how council feels about it. I think to have more than just one person make the decision on, we're going to add this bank today, move this money over here. I think it should be financial people like yourself, Heidi, and Lisa, and Marty, and possibly, not possibly, but including the assistant city manager. So together, if there was a bell or a whistle that needed to be sounded, I would hopefully one of you guys would notice something and say, I'm not comfortable with this, and then that would stop that process,
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so that's for a later discussion, just a little tidbit now as to why we're doing this, and hopefully we won't have to do this in the future. The city manager will just tell us that a decision was made to use this bank, and then we're informed, and then we move on. And even if he does it in an email or at a council, however the proper procedure is, I don't have a problem with it. I just want to make sure we have more than one person making that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any comments from council members?
No.
Okay, all right. The next item is, so are we as a council, are we in consensus to move that to tonight's special business meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Just to make it easier, is anyone not in consensus? Because it's hard to tell with, okay, everyone appears to be in consensus. The next thing is the fund balance policy, Marty.
Okay, the city of Batavia's, hold on, I'm coming to the, I'll make sure I get it exactly right here. All right. We have been taking a look at what has happened here with this COVID-19 situation, which obviously in fact, in talking to my colleagues, I've got some that have been in the business 30, 40 years plus, and a couple of them almost 50. And they've never seen a financial situation like this. And I'm talking about colleagues from different parts of the United States, and also some of my colleagues here in New York. And there has been some discussion internally, actually, in talking about what can we do here to put ourselves in a better position, because honestly, 15 to 20% is a lot better than the 10% policy. We had set a 10% policy, which was good, because we had to set a goal for ourselves. We had to get ourselves to a point where we were keeping that level of funds. At the last August, when we had our financial report, we were at approximately 11.3%. Well, we think that it's time, particularly because of the challenges we're facing and some, I call them hits or impacts to I'm going to get this right, I hope, unassigned fund balance, that we need to have an additional amount of unassigned fund balance in there to be able to face significant situations. So we're
Okay,
looking.
just, Marty,
Go ahead.
Marty, if you just hold on a second. Looking at the guidelines, the old policy was 10 to, was
10%.
it 10 to 20% or was it 10 to 50? Because I'm looking in here and it says, it's got 10 crossed out and it says 15-20%. And then it's got 15-25% in a numerical number. So what exactly are we doing? Are we moving it to 15 to 20 or 15 to 25?
15 to 25.
Okay, so obviously I think
That's the range.
right. So I just want to make sure the resolution is proper because it said 15 to 20 in the memo, so it might have been just a typo. Okay, continue on.
Yep. There's a typo there. Originally, it was a fixed amount of 10%. We're suggesting a range for two reasons. One, we think we need a lower target to hit at 15, but our goal would be to get ourselves up to 25% meet, which means that if we receive no money, no revenues for 3 months out of the year or for 3 straight months, our cash just totally dried up, then you would have unassigned fund balance to be able to handle. Or if we had a significant challenges with our health insurance, say we got extraordinarily large claims and the reserve couldn't handle it, and you're ending up going back to your unassigned fund balance with the general fund.
Right. To buy you, basically to buy you some time while you're trying to hope for the market to change or something like that.
Right. So we're basically moving ourselves away from 5 weeks. 10% is about 5 weeks worth, a little less than 5 weeks worth of fund, unassigned fund balance. 25% obviously puts us up to a full 3 months. So it's a much better situation. And I think it's a worthwhile and worthy goal. I have talked with other members of staff, and at least talked with Lisa Neary at least, and she was comfortable with that range. And so I thought that would be good to recommend to council. If you're good with that, we'll clean up our language, make sure everything looks right, and bring this to the next regular business meeting if you agree, which would be June 8th.
Lisa, if you can hear me, did you have anything you'd like to say in reference to this? Or this is Government Accounting Standards Board. This is pretty much in line with what they're talking about now for going in future.
Well, one of the things that GFOA will tell you is that they will not give us a recommendation of what our fund balance should be. So this really needs to be a policy that meets our best interests. And it seems as though coming into this COVID issue, that 10% really doesn't suit our purposes.
Right.
And, that's not to say that we're going to get the 15, excuse me, or 25 overnight. We're going to need a number of good years in order to, to hit those kinds of percentages. But we need at least the policy to allow us to do that.
Right. 'Cause otherwise, if we do that, we're going beyond the policy, and one would argue we're stockpiling money that we don't need or whatever. Now, this is a reasonable request to give us some cushion in the event the market drops or something wild happens, like just experience, that we would at least have a little more cushion to protect ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've had council president, members of council, a couple of the colleagues I've talked to, one of them, they had actually gotten themselves in a position where they literally had 9 months worth of unassigned fund balance. Of course, they were in the oil field.
Right.
And then we had another one that had 6 to 9 months that was here back in the state of New York. And so it is possible to be able to raise that. We think we need to start just putting our sights a little bit higher.
Yeah, I mean, there could be a point where it's almost too much, but I think increasing it by 5% does seem like a reasonable request. And then some years might be better than other years, but at least it gives us a target to try to achieve. And then,
Yes.
and it's only, it's money that we can protect ourselves with. Because
Yeah.
one of the things, and this might be a good time to bring this up, we were talking about, we had budgeted as council to put money into reserves. And now maybe we didn't want to put that money in reserves because we needed it for like everyday operating expenses. We talked to George about it, and George might want to be able to jump in on it, but there really is no mechanism for us to pull money out of that reserve and say, never mind, we're going to not use it in reserve, we're going to put it over here. There is no mechanism for it. The reserves are reserves because they're protected and they're locked for a reason, and money can only be used in that reserve for what it's designated for. So even though we're in trouble, we would not legally be able to properly take money out of reserves unless it was for, like if it was a building reserve, then we could take it out to fix a building, but we couldn't take it out to make payroll. So that became, and that's odd that that's the case. There should be an emergency clause. I mean, just a few months ago, we were going to put that money in reserve, and now we gotta because we budgeted. So there's some confusion there. So this would give us a little more protection, and because it's our money, but we can't use it if it's in a reserve. We can only use it for what it's reserved for.
Right. I did want to add, for the members of the council's sake, that at the Saturday meeting, talking with the people from the, Steve Hawley was on the call with the villages and towns and city and county, and did talk to him. And in addition, there's been conversation with NICOM about trying to open up some temporary flexibility on some of the reserves. And so the state comptroller has introduced some legislation, and we are sending a letter off to Assemblyman Hawley to ask him if they'd be willing to push for a little bit more flexibility than what the state comptroller wants. I got just an email just literally an hour before this meeting started, or an hour and a half, and from Barbara Van Epps at NICOM. She said the state comptroller was really having a lot of heartburn over loosening up the ability to utilize reserves. But he was willing to concede that there are concerns there. And so he came out with something extremely limited tied to COVID-19 expenses. So now our challenge is, and we're going to request of Assemblyman Hawley and Senator Renzenhofer, that they actually allow us, put in the legislation to allow us to be able to deal with operating expenses and give us a reasonable amount of time to be able to repay the reserve, so that it isn't a piece of legislation that is, we need it to be a little bit broader than what they're proposing is what I'm saying.
Right.
But at least the letter of requests going in, they are considering it, they are arguing about it, and they're talking about some other potential mechanisms to save us some money. So I will update council in a council update by the end of the week and let you know where that situation stands.
Okay. And again, it's an unusual circumstance. So maybe if anything good can come out of being shut down for a couple months, is it showed where we would want to maybe protect ourselves, and maybe things like this, discussions will happen. So if another emergency happens, we have the flexibility to use our own money to shore up more important areas, like keeping policemen and firemen and public works on the job versus a building fund that we're not going to build for a couple of years anyway, and there's that money sitting there. So, as long as they're talking about it, hopefully they can work something out somewhere in the middle that won't let you rob it totally, but allows you to take the percentage out or something. I hope they come up with something. It'd be better than leaving it locked like it is now. It's kind of frustrating to see that money there and not be able to use it for important items when we have an emergency.
Exactly.
Council President, this is George. Just very quickly to your point, the problem with reserve funds under Article 6 of the General Municipal Law is that each type of reserve fund is very restrictive as to what you need to use it for. And if there's any leftover balance as to how you can use it, most have specific provisions that you can only use, for example, a capital reserve unexpended for another capital reserve fund, transfer it to that location, for example. So when you look at different types of reserve funds the city or any other municipality may have, you have this very prescriptive set of requirements as to what a municipality can do. So although it's ultimately in normal circumstances a laudable process to go through and create appropriate reserves, when you get into a financial situation like this, you just don't have the statutory flexibility that you would hope for or want to be able to access some of those funds in a dire financial situation. Having said that, what Marty's alluded to is there is a piece of legislation in the Assembly. It was introduced on the 22nd. It's Assembly Bill 10492. It basically would add some flexibility to ban repayments, would also authorize the expenditure from capital reserve funds for capital costs associated with the COVID response, and then provide flexibility, if this were passed, to allow for temporary transfer of monies from reserve funds to pay operating costs or other costs attributable to the COVID situation with a 5-year repayment of interest on that type of transfer. Of interest and principal, but this legislation is something that NICOM has obviously been supporting on behalf of the municipal members, and it's something they're tracking very closely, as Marty and Rachel and I have talked about and touched on the need for more flexibility and more options for the city to address these situations going forward. So we'll keep we'll let council know as soon as we hear how things progress.
Anyone have any questions for George or Marty in reference to this? John, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just, if I'm understanding you correctly, George, we would be allowed to like borrow our own money. Is that what we could do? And then pay that fund back?
Basically, one of the elements of the legislation is it would modify the state finance law and the general law to authorize that type of use of the reserve funds.
Mm-hmm.
Case, there's two components. One would be a capital reserve fund could be used for capital expenditures.
Right.
But the second component would be that any type of transfer from any reserve could be used for COVID-related issues and impacts, so long as it was repaid within a 5-year period along with interest. So it would give municipalities some flexibility, probably much needed flexibility, given the overall state of the situation for the state and counties and so forth. But it's one of, as I understand it, probably 30 plus pieces of legislation that may be before the state legislature as they're starting to ramp up. So it's interesting. It sounds like it may provide some opportunities, but we'll have to see where it goes.
Okay, thank you.
At least they're talking about it, and hopefully they understand that it shouldn't be such a one-way trap. I mean, you want to encourage people to put money in reserves, but if now that we need them in an emergency, we can't get them out, people might put little less in and hold more back into a general fund or unassigned fund balance just in case, and that's not really helping the reserves at all, because I'm a big fan of putting money in reserves for those projects when they come later on, but not when that happens. It's kind of tough when you can't get it out in emergency. Ms. Christian, you had something you'd like to say?
Yes, George, weren't we able to use the sewer fund at one time if we needed capital improvements? We did something with either the sewer fund or the water fund at one time.
I'm not specifically aware of that, Councilperson Christian. If that were to be a situation, you'd have to track that particular reserve fund under this appropriate provision of Section 6 of the GML, and it would have had to have been used consistent with what that statutory section authorizes. So the problem here is you can't just use any one of these reserves, capital or repair or operations or something like that, and just shift it wholesale. By statute, the reserves can only be used for very, very discrete and specific purposes. So to your point, if that was a situation historically, I would have to believe that if we went back and we looked and that were the case, that it would have tracked per the statute as to what was authorized under that relevant section of the GML.
Wouldn't Lisa Neri know about that? Lisa, are you there?
Yeah, she's there.
Yeah, I'm here, Rosemary. We might have in the past used sewer, excuse me, the sewer funds. Now, not reserves. George is correct about reserves. You're
Correct.
only allowed to use them for specific purposes. And we would never be able to use the sewer or water reserves for anything. But you are allowed to get a loan, so to speak, from one of the other funds. But the caveat to that is if it is for a long-term, if it's for longer than a year, then you are required to pay interest back to that fund.
What's the interest rate?
It would have to be whatever the market rate is, I believe. We'd have to talk to probably Laura Landers at Freed Maxic and find out the specifics about it. We've not done it on a long-term basis in the past. We've done it on a short-term basis. Within 1 year, you can do a due to, due from between funds, but you have to have that paid back within a 12-month period. If it's anything longer, if you're doing something like this because you're in a financial crisis and you need those funds for a longer period of time, then it really has to be set up more like a loan where you have to pay interest.
That's interesting. Gina, you think we can check into that? Just in case?
Well, the problem right now is that with the COVID crisis that we're experiencing, the general assumption is that our water and our sewer funds are going to take a financial hit also, because you've got businesses that have not been up and running
Right.
and therefore either not utilizing the water and sewer services or possibly not being able to pay for their water and sewer services. So we are anticipating a hit on those two funds also. So we would be very hesitant to borrow from those funds in that you wouldn't want to put them also into a further financial
Right.
difficulty.
Now, the
Right.
key word here is fund and reserve. The fund is the actual fund. The reserve is already locked in for a specific purpose. And then
That was-
probably the intent is to lock them in for a specific purpose so that future administrations don't come in and say, we don't need all that money in the reserve. Let's lower taxes and then yank everything out of a building reserve. And now the building never gets built. And then the water plant or whatever you're going to build falls apart and it never gets replaced or fixed. So I see the good intent of locking those funds in. But if we would have known in January when we were doing our budget that we were going to take a hit, I don't think any of us would put any money into reserves. We would have just said, let's hold off on reserves this year and keep the money in our fund balance or in our fund, not in the reserve. In the event that we go short somewhere, we have the money. I don't think we would put money in a savings account and lock it down if we didn't know, if we knew the COVID was going to hit. But the timing was, we just passed the budget and it hit within a week later. And then the reserves were already assigned and it was already too late. We couldn't now, that money was technically transferred, even though it wasn't officially, but it technically on paper was transferred and it's now locked in. So that's the problem. I would rather them do legislation myself personally so that we can pull money out of reserves. That's more of a savings account, not necessarily an operating fund that we need to pay other bills for other things.
Do you know, just to clarify, I do believe, and George, maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that the money that we budgeted to fund reserves in the 2021 budget, I do believe that we have the option to change that budget. What we were talking about rescinding was the August resolution where we funded the $1.3 million into reserves back in August of 2019. And George, like I said, correct me if I'm wrong, but I still believe that we have the option to not fund the reserves per the 2021 budget. But you guys, council, would have to say that that would be okay.
I don't know, George is not, okay.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to take a look at the resolutions associated with that, and I guess the timing of that as well, Lisa. I'm not sure I'm in a position to opine on that right this second, but it's something we could look at if council.
Yeah, that's something you could look at and see. Not that we would do it this early, but I think that it's a good option to have. But if there might be a deadline, I mean, it has to be done within 1-2 months of the budget, then we have to make a decision. But if it's something we could do, we're getting near the end of our budget year and we're starting to fall short, that might be the time to do it. No one knows how much or less the economy is going to come back within the next several months. And I heard recently news today, they're expecting, the word was the economy to shoot up like a rocket in the fourth quarter. So I don't know what that exactly means, but it sounds like it's going to dramatically rise, and that things might be bad, but not as bad as they would be right now if they continued on the present path. But we got to figure anything opening up is going to be better than what we had when we had 3 months with nothing open. So if something is opening up, it's going to be some offset there, but nobody really knows, and it's only a guess at this point. But that'd be good to know, George, if you could just look into that and see if we have a timetable or if we can within a budget year. That just gives us an option. I'm not saying we want to do it now, but it gives us something to think about going forward.
Well, we currently, like, we will be coming to council next month with our budget amendment.
Right,
And, you know, for the previous 1920 year. And that
Right.
budget amendment usually involves asking to use reserves.
right.
So if we can do that after the fact, I would think that we could amend the 2021 budget during the budget year.
Yeah,
But, you know,
one would think
that's
so,
what we
but you
put
just
on it.
never know.
Right, right.
Okay,
would
so we'll
like-
look, it'll be definitely worth something to look into. John, you wanted to say something?
I would like to know for a fact what our options would be, just so we know, at least in the back of our head, what we can and cannot do.
I totally
Again, it's about being prepared for the worst. And I think
Right.
at this point, we really need to. I mean, I'm doing it on my own personal level as well. I'm preparing for the worst and making sure that I have funds available if I need to during a second wave of this thing. So,
Right, absolutely. So George will look into that and get back to us. And Lisa, thank you very much for that input. If you can find any documentation, you guys work on it together and kind of see what the options are. And we can talk about it next council meeting, or at least the meeting thereafter, so we know where we stand and what we have, what tools we have to play with if we need to move some money around, what we can move and what we can't move.
Will do.
Anyone else have any questions or concerns on that?
No.
Kathy?
No, Joe.
You're good? Okay, so are we, that was the fund balance policy. Are we in consensus to move that to, I don't know, is that just a notification, Marty, or is that something that gets moved to the June 8th meeting?
That needs to move to the June 8th meeting.
Okay, because it wasn't going to tonight's meeting. So are we consensus to move the fund balance policy to the June 8th meeting, and that'll give us another chance to talk about it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so that moves to the June 8th meeting. Next one up, Marty, is the lead services grant.
Yes, and if it's okay, I'll do a brief introduction, and if Matt's there, he can explain a little bit of what's going on. This was a grant in the amount of $554,112 that was awarded to the city of Batavia to replace lead lines. We have what I call lateral lines that come off of the water trunk, main trunks, up to the meters. And we do have a number of older lines here in town, and this is a good start for us over on Swan Street, Hutchins Street, and Otis Street in particular, as areas to have initial investigations for the presence of lead services. And then their process would be to draft construction, contract documents based on the findings of the investigations. Because obviously we don't want to just go in and start hitting every single house, because we may have houses here and there that they've already replaced the lead line. So why replace the line twice? So there's 2 or 3 steps to this process, and Matt's department has done a great job of getting this grant agreement together and ready for execution.
So Matt, did you want to give us a little more detail on that?
Yeah, just a couple items. One, it's a full grant. There is no required match by the city. The city will be providing some of our own in-kind services, just in an effort to stretch those funds as far as we can. So we will be doing the investigation with city crews and not charging that against the grant. As we try to identify, we picked 3 streets, Swan Street, Hutchins Street, and Otis as 3 that we're going to do investigation work on. Again, we targeted streets that were next to each other, a rather tight density of houses. Again, that will be the most cost-effective way when we do have a contractor come in. We don't want them hopping all over the city. That just drives up mobilization costs. And we want to replace absolutely as many of these service lines as we can with the funds provided. But again, I guess the important point to make here is it is a full grant, no required match from the city. We will be doing some in-kind services for for it as well.
Now, Matt, did you, is there a time limit where we can expect houses built before a certain time to possibly have this lead? Because I noticed the neighborhoods you targeted are somewhat older neighborhoods. Some of the houses there are the older construction from the 30s, 40s or whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. It's there are defined time periods. Once you get into the later 50s and certainly into the 60s, it pretty much had switched over to copper by that point. We also do that part of being a water purveyor that the city is. We have to do lead testing. It originally was annually. Our reports have been, or our results have been very positive. So now we only do it every 3 years. But we are given guidelines by the health department to what year houses were constructed to target those that have a higher likelihood of having lead in the system. And we try to do that because you're really looking for those most vulnerable places to do it. The lead service line replacement program also targets disadvantaged communities where the lower income, things of that nature. So each year, this is the second round of that. State divvies the money up into different regions, and then communities are selected within that region. We're fortunate enough to be in the second round to do this work. Expectation will be construction this fall or next spring at the latest.
How do they do the inspection? Do they come into your house or do they look with a camera somehow? How do they do that?
No, we will actually go to where the curb shutoff is, and that's really where it changes from public responsibility to private responsibility. And we'll take one of our vacuum trucks and we'll vacuum, excavate that hole down, put our eyes right on the material, determine what that material is, and then cover that hole back up. And we'll do, certainly a representative number of properties just to ensure that, okay, this is a high likelihood of where we're going to find an awful lot of lead services. Actually, we started this work last year. We thought we had a pretty good idea we're going to get this grant. There was a couple of streets we targeted, went and did about half a dozen locations fully expecting to find lead services, and we actually found galvanized pipe. So that's where we switched to some different streets. So we don't have a lot of records as far as from the water main to that curb shutoff what the materials are. So that's why we have to investigate it. Some communities, it was lead all the way into the house. We're not aware of any lead that goes into someone's house. And we've got, I go back to Jim Ficarella and Bill Davis, who were, both 30+ year employees, worked in the distribution system, as well as those guys started back, in the day when we used to actually get into everybody's basement and read their water meters. And they have never observed lead services on the private side. So we don't think that's an issue in Batavia. And we want to just get as many of these other, the corporate side, if you will, or the public side done as we can.
Any council members have any questions for Matt?
Yes, I
Rosemary,
did.
go ahead.
Matt, will there be any cost to the homeowners by any chance?
The only cost that a homeowner would have is when we went to make the connection, if their side of the service was in such poor condition that we could not make that connection. So that would be consistent when we do any of our water main projects. But other than that, the intention there would be no cost to the homeowner, only if their service is in such poor condition that we can't make that connection. For example, on the Union Street, South Main Street project last year, I think we did close to 200 services with all those. And I think there was only about 3 or 4 that we were not able to make that connection on. So we have a pretty high success rate being able to make that connection. But I can't say the risk is 0, but it is the intent is that there will be minimal or no cost to the homeowner.
Good. Well, I'm glad those streets are going to get it. Thank goodness. Thanks.
Anyone else have any questions?
Yeah.
Matt, one more thing. I noticed you sent a memo out for places that have been dormant during this shutdown to make sure they flush their lines out. I mean, did you want to take a moment and explain that? If people are watching, this would be a good chance to.
Absolutely. It's some guidance that the Department of Health sent out, and we follow up with a public service announcement. I believe the town of Batavia did the same thing. For example, when we test houses to see if they have lead in the water, we require at least a 6-hour dormant period. That gives that lead an extended time to leach out of the fixture or wherever that lead service line into the water. And that's what you're really trying to see. Well, we might have, houses or businesses where they've been shut down and haven't used any water for a month or so. So there could be just that potential for some contamination through lead, or even the chlorine dissipates after a while. So again, it's just good practice. If you haven't used that water in a good long period of time, let it run a little bit, make sure we get some some chlorinated water in there that's going to take care of anything that may have, grown, which is not likely. Again, it's a closed system and the water is chlorinated. But just make sure that we don't have any stale water, make sure everybody's getting fresh water in the system. So just let it run through the tap a little bit. Once you start to feel it get a little bit colder, that's a good indication that you're getting it out of the water main and the whole system has been flushed through. So again, any of those dormant properties, we certainly recommend to get run that water a little bit and freshen it up.
Anyone else have any questions then?
No.
Okay, so are we in consensus? This doesn't need to go to tonight. This can go again to the June meeting, correct?
That's
Yes.
correct.
So are we in consensus to move the lead services grant project to the June 8th meeting?
Yes.
Okay, so that gets moved. So Matt, you also wanted to talk about the engineer, I guess, since you're here?
Yes, part of the grant requirement was we had to go out for RFP for engineering services. If we were going to use it, some communities do all of the work in-house. It's really not practical for us. So we put out an advertisement for from engineering services. There was a selection team to review those proposals, and the team selected GHD engineers. GHD has done quite a bit of work for the city over the last several years. However, what really set them apart in this instance is that in the first round, the city of Buffalo was selected, and they are doing all the work for city of Buffalo. And in the second round, the city of Binghamton was selected. They're doing all of Binghamton's work, and they have just let the contract for that. So that seemed to be a really good footprint. Not only do we have a relationship with that firm, but they've also done an awful lot of this work, which will reduce the cost that we have to pay for creating the engineering documents, the construction documents. A lot of that work has already been done and bought and paid for between Binghamton and Buffalo. So it's just another way of helping us to keep that cost down so we can put that money into replacing lead service.
And I see that they're going to cover it to make sure we meet all the state requirements as far as hiring. And they have I see there's certain ratios of various businesses, minority, women, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. As is often the case with grants, there's MWBE goals, and that was one of the reasons we went out for an RFQ or RFP for this, is that you have to take a proactive stance in trying to do that, making sure you reach out to those disadvantaged businesses, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, so that outreach part of it happens. So if for some reason you don't meet the goals, you can show you've done your honest best effort to try to make sure they were included and kept up to that. So we'll be making that part of our contract documents and through the bid phase too, to try to make sure we hit those goals.
So it allows them to at least an opportunity to get contacted and give them an opportunity to bid on the project.
Absolutely. We want to make that as level of a playing field as we can for those disadvantaged businesses.
Great. Anyone have any questions for Matt then on that?
Yeah, Matt, where are they located?
They have several offices. Actually, they're headquartered out of Australia, but the local office we deal with is out of downtown Buffalo. They also have an office in Niagara Falls and Syracuse, I believe, as far as in New York State.
Anyone else? So are we in consensus to move that to the June 8th meeting as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that moves as well. Thank you, Matt. Marty, we talked about the Jackson Square. Did you want to talk about that? And maybe Matt's probably going to be involved in that as well.
Yeah, we'd be happy to. Matt and I both have been working on this, and his staff had been working and making sure the executions of the contracts are good. We're at the stage now where we really need someone to follow the administration of this grant. This is similar to the BDC has done something similar on other grants that they've had, and helping walk through these and making sure that they're done correctly. Every T has to be crossed just right. Every I has to be dotted just right. And so in taking a look at this and the different firms, we looked at it and decided it would be worthwhile to go out to RFQ for a grant consultant that would help us with this. And this is the next phase with that DRI project there in Jackson Square. The project has a total budget of $750,000. We have discussed this concept and idea with Mr. Chris Bowers over in the Department of State. He was comfortable with the approach that we were taking, and so then we felt comfortable coming to the city council. And as note, if you note in the bottom of the memo, it notes the cost of the service would be charged against the DRI grant as a project cost. And Matt can talk a little bit more about it on his side.
Yeah, and it says the cost could be charged, but I'm curious as to what is the cost, or what is the approximate cost? What can we expect on this?
Sure, and that's unfortunately that's something that's lacking a little bit in this resolution to council. The Department of State, the grant administration to that is quite complex. For example, we had to advertise for 3 weeks for any project that we do, which is a little unusual. Typically, we do 2 weeks, especially for something small engineering, small grant administration. So that really put us behind the 8 ball a little bit as far as hitting council meetings. So we will be receiving those letters until tomorrow. Quite often the grants we administer them ourselves. We have some staff that are very, very good at it. For example, the lead services project that we just talked about, over $500,000, we will administer that grant in-house. Some of the large road projects we've done, the local highway projects that are coming up, Cedar Street over the years, Walnut Street project, all of those Summit Street, those locally administered highway projects, Richmond Avenue that's coming up, and Harvester. I mean, those can be multi-million-dollar projects, and we'll administer those grants with our own staff because we're comfortable enough doing that. These are just the level of checks and balances and things that have to be done are just so cumbersome. And if you screw it up, to be quite honest, you can miss out on the money. So that's the reason we went this route. We did it with CDBG funding, which is also very similar in the complexity of the grant administration. And we used a firm at that point, and it was very helpful. We went through the entire process without a hiccup. So, the good news is we're going to have all that in tomorrow, and well before the actual business meeting, I will be providing council with a lot of that update and that backup information that you do not have tonight. We just didn't want to miss and lose a whole nother month. So I did want to get it in front of council, at least on the conference agenda, and answer any questions you have. And to be quite honest, it's one of the DRI projects, and I know the city manager is very high on his priorities for Public Works to support the projects that we're tasked with and try to get that DRI work going sooner rather than later. So that is really what has pushed this, and we're trying to get that up and going so that there'll be a lot of design work done this year and shovels in the ground hopefully a year from now.
And it's kind of a one-off unique project down there too. It's not something that our city employees have done year after year, like a road project where they would have like kind of somewhat knowledge of what's going on. This is a whole separate one-time thing almost. So
that's correct. And there'll be a lot of involvement with stakeholders. You have a lot of businesses there. You have the bid, the BDC, a lot of moving parts there that need some coordination and making sure that the voices are heard. So that ends up being, a true public gathering place that everybody envisions. And that's probably hitting the nail on the head. This isn't our standard water line project or street project. It is a little bit of a one-off.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Matt?
Yeah.
Are we in consensus then to move that to the June 8th business meeting? And by then, some of these X's with dollar signs in front of them will actually have numbers there and names there, so we know exactly what we're getting into, and we could discuss it again. Then we'll have some time for debate before we vote on it if we have some concerns. So that moves forward as well. One more question, Matt, or maybe Marty, someone could answer this. Bob and I were running an errand today. I was picking up my car out of storage, and I noticed that the mall had wires around it. Looks like there was some kind of mall roof work being done. Are they working on that, or are they on timeout, or what are they doing over there?
Not some kind of roof work. That's actual roof work. So the construction guidelines were eased up. We considered that an essential project regardless. The contractor did pull off for a while. They set up their safety areas, but I would say as we're speaking right now that the roof project is probably in the neighborhood of 35 to 40% complete, maybe even closing in on 50. All the old skylights have been removed. The ones that are cracked and broken, those have been covered up, roofed over, and really from down by the east end, kind of the southeast end, all the way up to almost City Hall. The roof has been replaced in some fashion, at least temporarily. So positive things have gone. The weather's cooperated, and so far so good.
So when do they expect to have that done? Do you have an idea?
I would think by the end of June, we'd be in pretty good shape. That would certainly be my expectation.
Okay, so hopefully those buckets will be gone by the end of June.
Yeah.
Yeah, we drove by and I saw it, but I didn't see anybody working on there, and it was only like 3 in the afternoon. So I don't know if they have a different schedule, but you know, it was nice to see there was some kind of equipment stacked up there, and some type of materials were up there, and it was roped off, but I didn't see any human beings up there working.
Yeah, the safety guidelines, that's up all the way around. You could be, working actually quite a ways away from the edge where you just wouldn't see them. If it was 3 o'clock, they may have been done for the day as well.
Oh, cool. All right, well, anybody else have any questions for Matt before we
Nope.
adjourn this meeting? Okay, so a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn the meeting.
Ms. Christian, and seconded by Councilmember Bayakowski. If you would call the roll, please.
Councilmember Christian,
Yes.
Perez,
Yes.
Bykowski,
Yes.
Jankowski,
Yes.
Veely,
Yes.
Pacino,
Yes.
Canali,
I think we lost him.
I lost John.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Briggs.
Yes.
Hold on. John's coming back in. Let's give him a chance to vote. All right, John, to end the meeting, your vote.
What's that?
We took the roll call to end the meeting.
Okay,
And we're going to start the conference meeting, but we needed your vote before we did that.
you got it. Yes.
Yes, okay, good. We saw we lost you there for a minute, sorry. All right, so I call to order the special business meeting. Who wants resolution 40-2020?
I'll take it.
Ms. Christian, if you would go right ahead and read it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move a resolution to amend the investment policy to add Bank on Buffalo as a designated depositor.
Seconded by
Second.
Mr. Karas. Any questions or concerns? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Christian,
Yes.
Perez,
Yes.
Bykowski,
Yes.
Jankowski,
Yes.
Veely,
Yes.
Pacino,
Yes.
Canali,
Yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Briggs.
Yes.
Okay. A motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mr. Bayakowski, seconded by Councilmember Canali. And call the roll, please.
Councilmember Bykowski,
Yes.
Jankowski,
Yes.
Veely,
Yes.
Pacino,
Yes.
Canali,
Yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Briggs,
Yes.
Christian,
Yes.
Perez.
Yes.
Okay, the meeting's adjourned. Take care, everyone, and enjoy the nice weather, and we'll see you in person in the first week of June.
Good.
Good night.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
Night.